Hey, welcome to Youth Factor. I am your host, Jared, and we have a great show for you. And by we, I mean me. As a youth pastor, what do you do when you leave a position and you cannot find your next position? And you're trying and you just feel like that door is closed? Does it mean God's done with you? Does it mean that you need to move on to senior pastor? Does it mean you need to just give up and go get another job because God's done with you and there's nothing else for you to do? Well, I want to answer that today, hopefully answer that today for you by telling a little bit of my story. All right, so the number one question that I have a hard time answering is, how long have I been in youth ministry, or when I get started? Kind of like the whole entrepreneur question, what do you do for a living? It's hard to say. Well, for me, the version of that question, like I said, is when did I start? Well, I don't know, because I actually got involved very young, still in high school, I think like my sophomore or junior year, on a leadership team. And I've kind of worked my way up at my home church, eventually becoming the youth pastor. And then we moved. At that time, I didn't really necessarily feel like I wasn't youth pastoring because I felt a calling to youth ministry or any of those things. I didn't even know about a lot of like that kind of grandeur of, or some of the talk and stuff that we use in youth ministry. I just wanted to help and be involved, and I had, and like I said, it got to the point where then we get a new youth pastor. We just go through youth pastors, and I was still there, and then a new youth pastor, I was still there. So I started getting used more and more. After graduating, became a junior high leader, and then, eventually becoming assistant youth pastor, and then we became the interim, that's what I'm looking for, youth pastors. When our youth pastor had to step out for some medical leave, and then when it was going to be longer before she came back than she originally thought, we were just named youth pastors officially at the church. And then when we left, we moved from our hometown in Central Valley, California, up to Sacramento. And I remember as we were driving out, we stopped at a little Panda Express and had dinner. Car actually crashed through the wall. That was kind of funny.
I thought perhaps the end of days was upon us, but it turned out it was just a disoriented old lady in a champagne-colored Toyota Avalon crashing into my world.
And we're driving out, and I remember telling my wife on the way to Sacramento, I really enjoyed that. And again, I didn't identify as a youth pastor. I was youth pastoring, but didn't identify as a youth pastor. I mean, I thought I was gonna be a film director at that point still and run a studio. But I remember telling her, I really enjoyed that. If God ever calls us to do that again, if we ever have the opportunity to serve in youth ministry again, I definitely want to take it. Well, little did I know, about 3-4 months later, I was going to be sitting in the district office talking to our district youth director about a youth apprenticeship program they had. And I got back into it. So that kind of starts my career as an official youth pastor, would be 2009 when I got into this apprenticeship. But like I said, I've been doing it since high school. This long background, I get into it. All of a sudden I learn about the official stuff, right? I'm at the district twice a week. I'm getting trained by some of the best people in our district. I mean, we had Glenn Berteau, Brett Allen, all these people coming in and speaking to us, Jeff Duvall. If you've a bunch of missionaries who've been serving for much longer than they've faithfully been serving God way longer than I'd even been alive. That was always humbling to have them come in. And so I got exposed to this whole youth ministry thing. And we did that for a while. We actually spent time at 3 different churches from 2009 to 2012. And we left, and I left thinking that maybe we were going to go into senior pastoring. And so I started applying to small churches that had run down. They didn't have a pastor, and they'd run down to 10 people, 15 people, 4 people, and they kind of weren't even able to take care of themselves financially. So the district stepped in and kind of took over, helped cover the bills and everything, and they were looking for senior pastors. Now, I grew up at all the meetings and everything, all the district events with the superintendent saying, oh, everyone wants to go and get a big church in Sacramento. No one wants to go to, and they would name small little towns into a district affiliate church. So I figured, I'll do it. I've always enjoyed a challenge, so I will go into district affiliate churches because they're desperate. They'll take anyone. No. After a year of applying to district affiliate churches, which again, my wife and I had pretty much been brainwashed that these are desperate churches of a few people. They just needed someone who was willing to make the sacrifice to step in and run these churches. And so we're we'll do it. Yeah, there's no doors opening. We'd actually been given 2 churches. One we were on our way to interview that we'd been told was ours if we wanted it. The only stipulation is we had to go see it first because it was so remote. They were afraid we were going to get there and back out. We're like, no, we'll take it. And they're like, no, that's fine, but you have to go see it. No one else is interested, but you do have to physically go up there and see it. So we're like on our way and we get a call saying, oh, hey, they just appointed a pastor, so don't go. And I was like, but it's our church. Similar stories happened twice. And I just told my wife, I was so discouraged at this point. I felt like God was done with me and this door was closed. So I quit. Like, I was working at a car lot and I hated it. And I just told my wife, I was like, obviously God's closed this door. I'm going to stop trying to, smash it back open. We literally are applying for the one thing they're begging for people to apply to. And after a year and a half and dozens of tries and applications and resumes, we can't get in. Like, that should tell us something. This is obviously not what God has for us. So it became very clear that, continuing on, and that wasn't going to happen. Okay, so now I understand that this is easy to hear my story and think, okay, well, you're back in youth ministry now. You went off and you did your business stuff, and you're back in youth ministry now, and you've got your YouTube show and all that. So it must have all worked out fine. And I mean, yes, but it sucked. Okay, I'm going to level with you right now. This whole episode was inspired but I've seen multiple times youth pastors, young guys who have, had, whether it be their home church position that they're now leaving and they can't find work, or just youth pastors, doesn't matter. I've seen tons and tons of, when I say tons and tons, I mean like maybe a dozen. In the forums, I keep saying forums, it's Facebook groups. Forums kind of, I know, are outdated. Keep saying, I've applied to 23 positions. I've been applying for X amount of months. Should I just give up? Maybe I should just get a job and not pursue ministry anymore. And it breaks my heart because I was in this position and I know how hard it was. Like, I remember crying out to God, what did I do? Like, why? Why can't we get into anything? Like, we're literally going for the lowest bar and we can't even reach that. Like, what is going on? If this isn't your will. And I felt like for at least a good 2 years, I felt like how can I talk about it? And it was like, I felt like God wasn't even listening to my prayers. And obviously he can hear me pray and he can hear it, but I felt like the door had been closed. I couldn't even get the, you pray and you feel like, God's hearing you, you make that connection, you'll feel better even if you're still in the middle of a problem. You feel like, you've had your prayer time. Like, I couldn't get even that. It just felt like we were totally shut off. And it was super discouraging, and I gave up. So I had been working in the car lot for a little bit, and I just went back to another job, and I threw myself into business. I started up, a freelance business. I kind of mentioned some of the stuff. I make a lot of entrepreneur references. And I got to the point where I still knew I was called to one day, be a senior pastor that had been spoken over me. I believed it. I felt like it, wasn't just some crazy person speaking something over me. And I remembered, I think it was a Catalyst conference podcast I'd listened to, and the guy had talked about how he was church planter, because I wanted to be a church planter so bad. And I remember him saying that he was planting a church in his 50s, and how, it's normally a young man's game, but God called him in his 50s, and he'd been whatever, I don't know what it was, something before. And I remember listening to that and almost pitying the guy. Now again, I was like 23, 24 when I first heard this. And like almost pitying the guy, like, oh, that sucks. Like, you're 50, like your life's practically over. I know how dumb this sounds now. And again, I was like 20 something, I didn't know. And thinking like, oh man, I would hate that. And so then I get to this point where I'm like, okay, I know that one day I'm going to be, back in ministry. I'm probably going to end up being that guy. I'm going to probably be the guy, like, I'm going to go off, I'm going to do my business, I'm going to do business stuff, be an entrepreneur, do all that kind of stuff. And then, like in my 50s, like when I go to retire from my business and whatever, sell my business off, go back into ministry and pastor a little church somewhere. And I kind of accepted that, but it was depressing. Like, it was hard because, I'd been for so long, like, ever since I was young, I wanted to, use my gifts. I didn't have the theological framework of like ministry and calling and all this kind of stuff. But like ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to like draw comics to like win people to Jesus who wouldn't come into church, and that kind of evolved, into media. And eventually I got put in the youth ministry. So this was a super hard time. I'm working like 12-hour days, which if you're lucky, is 12-hour days. Most of the time you end up, someone comes in right when you're closing in the car lot and you end up spending another hour or two. Hardly seeing my family and hating it. Like literally, going into work and it feeling like prison. It was like, oh, it was almost as if I was in prison and I was allowed to go home at night. And I would, just being honest here, like I would many times cry on the way to work. Just leveling here. I really want to encourage some of you who are going through the same thing. So that's why I'm getting a little vulnerable and opening up. I would get up in the morning, I would see my kids, I would make them breakfast, put on something for them, you know, and get them food and get them set up until, you know, their mom was going to get up in just a little bit, excuse me. I would, you know, put on tuck in my shirt, put on my, you know, my tie, all that kind of stuff, which I had to shave every day, as you can see, isn't really my favorite. Get all corporate-y looking, which I hated. And then I would kiss my kids and hug my kids and tell them goodbye. And I would say, see you tomorrow. And it devastated me because I was literally going to be gone all day long. I wouldn't be back until after they were in bed. I wouldn't be getting home till 10, 11, a couple times 12, but 10, 11, 10:30, 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night. And I'd have dinner. I would maybe watch a show with my wife, and I'd be so tired, I'd want to go to bed. It was so bad that on the weekends, or the days I had off, I didn't have a whole weekend. I get one Sunday a month off. So, you know, then being out of church, you know, made it even worse. On the Saturdays I was off, I was so, like, it's not stressed out, but I was so consumed with the thought of, okay, but tomorrow I have to go back into work. Or those weekends when I got the whole weekend off, that once a month, I'm like, okay, so it's now Friday evening and I'm doing something with my family, but then it's going to be gone like that, and I'm going to be back at the car lot, and it's going to be an entire month before I have another whole weekend off. And it was like overwhelming. It was like kind of crushing me in that sense. And I don't really know why I'm going into all this, other than I just want to let you know that, like, I've been there. And that's the whole reason I'm doing this episode, is try to help you, to say don't give up, that God isn't done with you. Now I kind of actually want to jump into a couple of tips. So hopefully that helped you maybe realize that, you know, you're not the only person to ever kind of feel like a door was shut and apply to a ton of places and not be able to get in. It doesn't mean that God's done with you forever. I encourage you to keep going, keep trying. I mean, maybe if you can't get into somewhere, maybe you do have to end up getting some job in the meantime, but don't turn your back on the possibility to still be in ministry. Don't give up your identity as, you know, a servant of Christ. Don't think like, well, I'm done in that and I'm gonna just go into this job now. Don't lose that, because I did. And it ended up I watched a lot of my friends who went through a similar position. It didn't take them nearly as long because of, I think they had a little bit better of a mindset and a positive attitude, and didn't spiral down into some of the stuff that I did. So I actually want to go through a few tips. One that I feel like I completely nailed and just like was awesome at, and like 2 or 3 that I wish I could go back and do better because I failed awfully at. So let's jump into those. Okay, so the first thing is, I feel like this is a good time for you, if you're watching this and you're in that transition, really evaluate yourself. And like, even if you have to take several days, if you have to kind of poll some people, you know, if you need to go and spend the weekend in the woods, whatever it is, really evaluate yourself. And not like I'm evaluating myself so I can put skills on a resume. Evaluate yourself. Like, really look and really pray, and even fast if you need to see who you are and kind of where you're weak. It was becoming painfully obvious to me a few of my weaknesses in youth ministry, and that was something I really wanted to work on. And not only were they causing my ministry to kind of stumble a little bit and not to be able to be as effective as it could have been, it was causing a lot of friction and a lot of stress between me and my senior pastors. And that was kind of what was causing a lot of that turnover, where I was only spending, you know, 1 or 2 years at a place. So I made a list. Like, I actually made a list. I think I wrote it down in a Google Doc, but I had it memorized because it's something I thought about almost every day. I thought to myself, what can I do to improve these skills? And that's actually why I got into the car lot business, selling cars. That, and the fact that I needed to, you know, pay rent and put food on my family's table. But ultimately, that's why I chose that job, is because it was the scariest thing I could think of. It was the furthest thing out of my comfort zone. And I said, you know what, I need to do this. I need to jump in, and I need to just kind of level up my skills and kind of level up myself as a person. So that's something I highly encourage, is once you come up with those areas you can improve upon, it's a great time to work on that. Now, I also am a believer, you know, because I've mentioned Gary Vee a few times. He talks about, don't work on your weaknesses, work on your strengths.
If you know who you are, then by nature, you'll probably bet on your strengths. If you bet on your strengths, you'll win.
So I'm a big believer in that as well. And I feel like when you're in youth ministry, you need to not be, I mean, if you're horrible with money, don't spend, you know, maybe you shouldn't be the person to like create the budget and stuff. Like maybe you talk about it with someone who's a little more gifted and they kind of draft it for you and you can approve it. Like obviously I do believe in that, but these were things that were really causing friction and really causing problems. And a lot of them were things that like I could be better at. I felt like I could actually improve significantly, and I did. And I came out of them way better. So there's kind of that fine line between like don't waste your time trying, you know, to improve skills that maybe aren't your natural ability. Like find like the diamonds in the rough. Find things that I believe it's John Maxwell, he talked about how there's like the levels of leadership, and there's certain attributes that, you know, you can only like your weaknesses you can only bring, like it doesn't help you that much. It's similar to the Gary Vee thing, but like how you can spend a lot of time, but bringing up like a 3 to like a 4 or a 5 isn't as effective as taking like an 8, like something you're really good at, and getting it to a 10 and being exceptional in that. So find those key things, like not just the little things that probably won't matter that much and you probably aren't going to gain that much from. Find those key things that are maybe hidden strengths of yours, things that need to be polished, any of those kind of things like that that are causing problems, and really work on those. You have some time now. I literally chose my job to do this for me because I needed that external motivation and pressure. I'd read, what's the book? Think and Grow Rich. It talked about when you're young, work, I can't remember, I'm going to mess up the quote, but it's essentially work to learn, not work to earn. Oh, I think that's it actually. And I really took that to heart. And so I jumped in like I said, as a car salesman, and I worked there for a year. That was my goal. I did it almost to the day. At a year, I think I went like 3 or 4 days over. The year mark, I worked at 2 different car lots, got tons of experience, and really grew as a person. I hated literally every millisecond of it.
A, B, C. A, always B, B, C, closing. Always be closing. Always be closing.
But I don't regret it because I was able to really work on not my weaknesses, but I was really able to take my mid-level strengths, my 6s and 7s and my 8s, and make them 9s and 10s. Okay, so you've heard about what I actually did right when I was in between. Now here's a few things, not so much. My number one advice that I didn't do so well is to passionately and desperately pursue God. I started out strong, and I was really seeking God for direction, but as I was not hearing, as I said, it felt like there was that barrier. I was an idiot, and instead of realizing that that was like God's way of kind of pulling back so I would then come chase after him and deepen my relationship, I spiraled into depression. And I got to the point where I was hardly praying, I wasn't reading my Bible, I wasn't going to church very often. As you heard, I only had one Sunday a month to be able to go, even if I wanted to. But I did nothing to try to maximize that by like finding a small group on a night off or like a night that I had available. I honestly, it was super hard to even go that once a month because it was, to me, it just represented what I had fallen from and highlighted and emphasized where I was now. So I would recommend not doing that. I would say if you pray as a youth pastor an hour a day, going into this next period, make it 2 hours, make it 3 hours. If you read your Bible for 20 minutes a day, make it 40 minutes, make it an hour. Just pour into your Bible, pour into your prayer time, especially in between. Like if you have a little bit of money, like I did, I had a little bit of money saved up, so my first few months, I didn't have to get a job right away, and I was really worked on a lot of business ideas and getting some stuff together and figuring some stuff out and skills and whatnot. Like, I should have put just as much time into trying to start that first business before I got in the car lot, pursuing my relationship with God and growing. That's like probably my number one regret right there. So passionately, desperately, like your life literally depends on it. Pursue after God in this period of time, because it's so easy to fall back, to fall into depression, to fall into the whole woe is me, why doesn't God want to use me anymore, and to even like lose your identity as a minister of God, and to get into all this kind of self-pity and really go backwards in your relationship. So that is my main piece of advice. So technically, if you're in a hurry, you could stop watching now because that's the most important thing. I don't know why I put it in the middle. Let's move on to the next one though. Okay, here's another thing I was horrible at. Grow your network. So I was so upset that that God wasn't using me. I was ashamed. I pulled back. Like, I felt bad. I didn't want to be around my fellow youth pastors. I didn't want to be around any of the people who could have helped me, who could have spoken to my life, any of these kinds of things. Oh, I guess I just made up another one is, for that, not just grow your network, but, stay connected to your mentors and peers and whatnot. But I didn't take this as an opportunity to go out, and I could have volunteered at other youth ministry, hey man, I'm, not in something right now, but here, I could come and help out. I could volunteer, just wanting to keep involved. There's so many things I could have done. I could have made connections. I actually did the opposite. Like, I went and I unfriended all my youth pastor friends because it just hurt too much to see them in youth ministry. What kind of started for me is I had a buddy who a few months after I was out, he kind of had he had like a bad experience. He ended up leaving under not the best terms. And then I was like, oh, I felt for him. And I was like, oh, I'm already several months into this. So like the good part of me was like, oh, I feel for him. The not so spiritual part of me was like, sucks to be him. At least I'm a few months ahead of him and hate to have to start over again like 4 months ago. I think that was about the time. And then he got a new position right away. So once I was kind of hitting like my low, he got a nice position in Sacramento of all places. It's the holy grail of like Northern California, Nevada district. And that stung. And I was like, what's wrong with me that I'm stuck in limbo and he's already at like an even better position? And so I unfriended him. I did the super spiritual thing, right? No, I unfriended him, and then I went through and I unfriended every single youth pastor I was connected to.
Attention! Attention, everyone! I have an announcement to make. I am leaving this party.
So I did the opposite of what I'm telling you to do. So I suggest reach out, grow, take some time to grow this network, and don't do it by being like, hey, I'm looking for a position, do you know of anything? Do it by providing value. And honestly, that's actually probably going to be how you end up finding your next position anyway. Someone's going to be like, oh, I like this guy, or I like this girl, she's got hustle, they've got some skills we need. Oh, or the fact of like, on the other side, you're feeling like you're putting out all these resumes. These senior pastors or these hiring committees have the opposite problem. They're getting inundated with resumes, and it takes so much time to interview and background check, and that costs money. And so a lot of times if they find someone halfway decent, they just want to end this process because it's not fun for the people who have to actually hire. So if you're putting yourself out there, it's going to make it a lot easier for them to go, well, let's hire this guy, let's hire this girl. Like, she's already here helping out. She's already here like volunteering, or she's doing our video announcements, or she's whatever. It's going to make it a lot easier. So yeah, grow your network. Okay, the next one's going to sound kind of similar, but there's some nuances that I think it's worth taking the time to go into. The difference is grow your brand. I know this is not at all a church or ministry type concept, and sometimes can be counterintuitive to what we're kind of taught. So what do I mean? Okay, well, for one thing, what I'm doing now, right? Like, I am kind of growing the brand of me as a youth pastor by doing, having youthfactor.us, the blog, by doing these videos, having them out there. A lot more people are seeing me. So in reality, if I wasn't as completely madly in love with the position I am now, this would really help my chances if I was looking for work. It could be the same thing for you. Like, if you're competing with all these other youth pastors, and one of the number one questions I got when I did start applying again, to get this position, is they wanted to get a sense of, one, kind of me, my personality, and two, they wanted to kind of see me preach. I think to kind of, one, make sure you're not horrible.
We're talking about how Lot chose to go pinch his tits. Excuse me. Pitch his tents. Pitch his tents is what I said. And you heard nothing else here. This is church, my gosh. Man, stop laughing. All right? Man, am I red right now? Holy cow!
To just kind of get an idea of who you are. And so I was constantly getting asked if I had sermon examples. Luckily I had some. I put, YouTube link, and here you go. Here's me from a previous position. And having like a blog, having something like that is one more thing for them to get an idea of who you are. I mean, look, this is only, I think, like the 8th episode. It's less than 10 episodes. I think it's episode 9, 10, something like that, depending on how it comes out. And you can already see a lot about how I feel my work ethic, what I believe about youth ministry, my personality. So you could, if I was theoretically applying and I listed my blog in my resume, and so they're looking through 10, 20, 100 resumes, and they click on the link, they go to my blog, within a very short period of time, they're going to get a really good sense of who I am, even in these just last 10 episodes. So that would really make me stand out. Now, so the same could apply for you. If you're a writer, whether it be a podcast, it could be the video, whatever your form is, don't just stop. Like if you're called in the youth ministry, don't just stop just because you're not getting paid to do something. And then if you're I even feel like I'm doing this. I'm doing this because I feel like I have something, like God kind of made me. If I'm being 100% honest, I've actually fought God on doing this for about a year and a half. And last November, he kind of made me. That's a whole nother story. But my motivation is because I believe that I'm helping other youth pastors. So this is something that you could do even while you're in a position, because it's going to help you the next time you're in that transition. I wanted to say about how I could have done it differently. So when I first got out of it, and I was doing all the marketing stuff, and I had a lot of this experience. I even actually spent a year working with the church as doing all their marketing, their website, all their email and copywriting and all that kind of stuff. If I had started a blog back then, like when I first felt like I needed to be doing what I'm now doing as Youth Factor, and imagine if over those 3.5, 4 years, whatever it ended up being, let's say 3 years, because of that first year and a half, I was really trying to, like I said, apply to positions. Imagine if once I said, okay, this door is closed, I don't know when God's going to call me back in, and I recognized I have a lot of skills because I already had tried something in the past called Church Loot, and if you remember that, kind of embarrassing. The problem is I couldn't, I needed to make money for my family, and that's the whole reason that didn't kind of work out. I was trying to monetize it too fast, too soon, and that was really the primary goal. But I had a lot of things I could have shared, especially as I got into my business and it was growing. I had a lot of things. I was working at this church, and he was constantly praising my skills and my knowledge and how much of a blessing it was. Now imagine if I was like, I'm going to go out, I'm going to start a podcast, I'm going to start a blog, a YouTube show, whatever, and the same things that they're paying me to do and they're saying is such a blessing to them, I'm going to give away for free and teach how to do it. You think that would have maybe pulled me back in the ministry a little sooner? That would have been a lot easier to find some opening if I kind of made a name for myself for that. So it worked out the way, I did. I feel like it took longer than it needed to because I really wasn't listening to a lot of things God was saying. For example, what now is Youth Factor. I've had this idea, like I said, for about a year and a half. I've even false started it in the past and just been like, I'm not willing to go there. A lot of it had to do with still issues I was dealing with, not being back in youth ministry. And even once I did, it took me a month and a half being back in a youth ministry of really feeling it strongly before I would even do it. And then when I started in November, I put up the website, I put up 1 or 2 little articles, and then I walked away from it again very reluctantly. And it wasn't until one of my articles I wrote and it kind of exploded, or one of the episodes, something like that, kind of went not viral by any means, but viral by the standard of what I was used to. And I made a shift in another direction, which you can see what these videos are like. They're not like the original idea of just teaching how to use Facebook to reach students in your community through ads, and how to do the new Instagram platform, all that kind of stuff was my original idea. It wasn't until I actually started that God kind of said, okay, kind of the whole Abraham thing. When you look at the map, he just started and then God kind of turned him around. So kind of similar to that went really long. I'm sorry, I kind of got everywhere. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, so the next one is keep your ear to the ground. And what I mean by that is don't lose touch with youth culture. Again, I pulled out 100%. I was upset, I was hurt. I didn't want anything to do with it just because it was just a reflection back. I could just see where I was, and I was, like I said, I had all these issues of abandonment issue. I don't know, whatever I was going through. I kind of lost touch with all of it. I wasn't paying attention to anything. Like I said, I left all the youth pastor groups I was in. What would have been much smarter is to, just like the first one of honing my skills, is to have kept abreast of what was going on in youth culture, with culture in general. I could have really, it would have been a great time. I could have, normally there's so many things we love to research and look into and whatnot, but we're just so busy with studying and meeting with students and all these other things. I had all this time where I could have been doing that. Like I could have been catching up on the books. I could have been finding the best stuff, researching all this kind of stuff. So when I jump back into it, I would have been more than ready to hit the ground running. Now, I feel like I was blessed and really lucky because this position, I felt like I was able to catch up really quickly because I'm also the high school teacher. So I have a dozen students that I spend Monday through Thursday pretty much all day with. 2 of those days we have youth services. I spend like literally like 15 to 18 hours with a lot of my students a couple days a week. The rest of them I 8 to 10. So I was able to get kind of like that hyper kind of boot camp back into youth culture just by being around them so much. But obviously if I'd taken a different position, wasn't doing the teaching, it wouldn't have been that case, and I would have had to spend a lot more time and effort catching up, getting back into what the culture stuff was. So yeah, don't let go of that. Use that as a time. Think of it as, you know, whether it be 6 weeks or 6 months or 6 years, whatever this little sabbatical is that God's calling you into, use that. Think of it as, what am I trying to think? What is it? I think a doctorate is what I'm trying to say, you know, where essentially it's not like there's particular guidelines. You have to come up with a topic and you have to research it and you have to like write this big paper. I think that's how a doctorate works. Think of it almost like that. Like you are going into like this research mode. You're like, you know what? I'm going to study and learn, you know, whether it be just the Bible, the youth culture stuff, all this kind of stuff. And so, yeah. That's it for that. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I have no clue how long it's been, but it feels like it's gone really long, so I apologize for that. I hope, my prayer is that this has been encouraging. I would be thrilled if there was someone out there who was thinking of quitting and giving up and, you know, going into insurance or car salesman or real estate. Those seem to be the 3 things that men of God go into when their feelings are hurt or they feel like they don't have a ministry position open right now. Whatever it is that you're doing, I would love if this video was able to stop someone from kind of giving up on their calling and their dream of being in ministry and cause them to double down and jump back in and really pursue what it is that, you know, God wants for them next. If that's the case, please email me. I would love to hear your story. Jared, Jared, N like Nate, because it stands for Nate, my middle name, Elrod, ELROD @gmail.com. Super would like to hear from you. That was lame. Or you can, you know, tweet me, Jared Elrod, or any of the other. You can just message on this YouTube video or blog post, wherever you are. But I would love to hear from you. And if you know someone who you think is maybe going through this or a little discouraged, please pass this video on. That would be awesome. Okay, so you know what time it is now, right? It's the end of the video. It's the time where I try to convince you to subscribe. So go ahead and click the subscribe button wherever I have it on the screen this time and join up so you get all the latest episodes. If you're on the website, you can subscribe there. And the cool thing is, when I put a new blog post with a new video, you'll get an email about it. That's pretty nifty. Yeah, go ahead and subscribe. Go ahead. Yeah, we're not done yet. The video's not over yet. Go ahead and subscribe. All right, good job. All right, see you guys next episode.